to the last panel discussion of this great edition of the New York Encounter. My name is Marco Bardazzi, I'm an Italian journalist. I'm really glad to be here with these two great speakers. I will introduce them to you in a moment. Let me just try to frame the discussion we will have tonight with you. 1 year ago, the world was looking at the Arab world thinking, this is a new beginning with the Arab Spring, as it was called and as we are still calling it. 1 year later, what you read on the mainstream media around the world make you think we are now entering an Islamic winter. Gone are the young Facebookers and Twitterers braving bullets in Cairo and Tunis in the name of democracy and winning their war against dictators and regimes. Now we keep hearing that they are facing a rising to power of political Islam, of Islamists, with some experts and pundits arguing that democracy is not really the best choice for these countries. Let's take a quick look at the situation today, at least how it looks like in the eyes of many international observers. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood is winning the parliament elections, and the party coming second are the Salafists, bringing a very strong Islamist message. In Tunisia and Morocco, Islamists close to the Muslim Brotherhood tradition have won elections without too much of an effort. In Libya, with Muammar Gaddafi now gone, they'll probably do the same. In Syria, the secular regime of Bashar al-Assad is challenged and it's reacting badly. In Gaza, Islamists of Hamas have been ruling since democracy and free elections were granted. In Yemen, elections have been promised and the Islamist party might emerge even there. I don't even mention Iraq because it's too complicated. There are those who argue Saudi Arabia is behind the rise of Islamists in the entire region. Then there is Turkey, moving away from Europe and toward a model of society with a stronger Islamic influence. And there is Iran, still led by a despotic Islamic theocracy. However, this is just one way of looking at what is happening in the Arab world. We can argue about what we mean when we talk about Islamists. Actually, we should argue about what we mean when we talk about Islam in general. In order to understand what has happened in this past year, we need to consider something much more important than geopolitics: people. People surprised the world 1 year ago in Tahrir Square and on the streets of Tunis. People are those asking for change. People are those making history. People are those keeping hope alive. Today, with this dialogue, we want to understand what has happened to the so-called Arab Spring and what could happen in the future. Moreover, we want to understand what is still moving young people, and not so young ones, to keep fighting and sometimes to die for freedom. The title of this event is Either We Depend on God or on Power. We want to understand what is this dependence on God that can set you free, as opposed to a religious idea or ideology that can become just another kind of power. In order to deal with these questions, we have invited two outstanding speakers. And I'm going to introduce the first one. The first speaker for tonight is, on my left, Mr. Frank Anderson, who is president of the Middle East Policy Council. He served for 27 years in the CIA, from which he retired as chief of the Near East and South Asia Division in 1995. Following his retirement, he spent 14 years providing information and advice related to the Middle East to American and international businesses and to US and foreign governments. Mr. Anderson's writing on the region has been published in the journal Middle East Policy, the New York Times, Washington Times, Los Angeles Times, and several other newspapers. He has appeared in the major US broadcast television networks and Russian and other foreign TVs. Mr. Anderson was educated at the University of Illinois in Chicago, where he graduated with a BA in Political Science, as well as at the Foreign Service Institute. Please welcome Mr. Frank Anderson.
Forgive my preparation. I'm a 20th century person dealing with 21st century things. I'm promised that it's coming. I'm ready to begin. First, I really want to express my appreciation to the organizers of Encounter. I'm honored to be here, and I'm excited by the energy and the experience of being among you at this time. I was more than a little troubled trying to get my arms around the theme of, do we depend on God or on power? I'm not certain this is a choice. We make a choice whether or not to believe that God exists and that God is relevant to us. We can make that same choice with power. As we're talking here, it occurs to me that a room filled with people who were asked to address the question of whether we choose God or power might very well suspect that God exists and that God matters. So let me ask, how many do? Me too. But in what context? Well, first let's talk about, does power exist? No 4-year-old that's been pushed out of the sandbox by a 5-year-old doubts it. Those of us who have reached adulthood, and I'm very late in it, have seen state power and corporate power act to great evil and to great good. I've been to war. I've watched state power do evil. I live in a society where my infrastructure, where healthcare and education are the responsibility, or the result of very positive state and corporate power. The question then, as a believer, isn't do we choose between God or power? It's how do we deal with and interact with power in light of God's interest and commands to us. I am not an orthodox person. I'm convinced with more confidence than I've ever had in almost 70 years of God's existence and relevance to me. As I become more convinced, I get less certain of my understanding of God's nature, but also more convinced that it doesn't matter. God understands God's nature. I'm given a Christian tradition in which to package that understanding, and it's comfortable for me. This is a tradition that God loved us enough to come and spend share his existence with us, to sit and eat with us, and then to die for us. And that gives me great confidence that whatever this God has in mind is okay. On the other hand, I've seen enough evil in the world that I am now persuaded God does not intervene doesn't intervene in sports events. Otherwise, the Chicago Cubs would not have spent over 100 years without a pennant, or, a world championship. Convinced that God does not intervene in war, it's too ugly and too alien to God's intentions. But I do understand as a Christian that we are to be the body of Christ. It is our responsibility to act so that God's will can be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's our responsibility, in the words of St. Francis, in everything you do, proclaim the gospel of Christ. If you must, use words. God wishes us to love God and love each other, and that boils down to me that being a good Christian means being a good citizen. And as a good citizen, both my role here tonight and the career that I chose involves making accurate assessments, to seek information, to follow the evidence, and to suspect bumper sticker understandings. So in that context, we talk about the Arab Spring. There are plenty of reasons to celebrate it. They've been noted. Corrupt and repressive regimes have fallen. The slate could be wiped clean in preparation for new and positive things. Literature, Orwell's Animal Farm comes to mind. History, France, Russia, Cambodia, Iran, and our induced disaster in Iraq give one pause. I also come from a profession that worries when we see positive things happening. To quote an old friend of mine, when intelligence officers smell flowers, they look around for a coffin. So is the Arab Spring what we hope it is, or is it going to descend into an Islamic winter? First, this was a series of important events. In Morocco, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, in Jordan, in Syria, in Yemen, and in Bahrain and Oman, across the Arab world, popular uprisings forced or at least encouraged governments to make significant reforms. In Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, and arguably now in Yemen, the governments fell. Syria is in bloody conflict. Throughout the Arab world, people are excited and their governments are concerned. In our country, I think the Occupy Wall Street and Occupy McPherson Square in Washington, D.C., and Occupy sort of every other open space in our cities follows at least afterwards, and maybe ex post facto, ipso facto, would indicate that the Arab Spring led to something here in the United States. People throughout the world are welcoming these events. Now let me try to go through data. And the data I've chosen to depend upon are recent public opinion polls. I want to get done in 20 minutes, so I want to talk about the methodology. I'm willing to and happy to later. Just trust me, these are polls by responsible organizations that did their work well. It was Brookings Institution, the International Republican Institute, and an organization called the Danish-Egyptian Dialogue, whose polls I'm depending on. First thing I'll tell you is that around the Arab world, the mood is optimistic. Let me see if this slide comes up. Here we go. Ask people, as a result of the Arab Spring, are you more optimistic, feeling no change, or more optimistic? I spoke to my wife earlier saying if the slides don't work, maybe I can just say these are statistically significant changes, and I'll just demonstrate. And with an Italian audience, that should work. At any rate, let's go. There's optimism. This is an interesting slide, the next one. There's not just optimism in the places where it's happened. In Morocco, as well as in Egypt, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and in the United Arab Emirates. Every area is one that responds very positively to the question, as a result of the Arab Spring that began in Tunisia and Egypt, the situation in my country has gotten better. Worse or had no impact. You'll note that better wins in almost every country except, understandably, those that say no impact or too early to tell. Across the Arab world, sympathies overwhelmingly with the opposition. This next slide shows a question. When you watch the events in Bahrain, Yemen, and Syria, are your sympathies with the government or with the opposition? You'll note that they're way into the post-85 and 90% in Syria and in Yemen. Bahrain, it's a little less, and I would argue, maybe we'll get into it later, there's good reason for it to be a little less. But what's going on? Pardon my 20th century. These movements are seen as legitimate and authentic. And this is an important thing. The question here is, when you think about the Arab Spring, is it mostly foreign governments trying to interfere in your nation? Organized political parties trying to seize power? Or ordinary people seeking dignity in their lives? Ordinary people seeking dignity wins hands down. What started it? And why did it topple governance in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, and not elsewhere? One way to say that what started it was a young man, Mohammed Bouazizi, trying to make a living, and a corrupt police officer took that opportunity away from him and destroyed his ability, at least on one day, December 17th, to make his living. His response, or his experience in trying to achieve redress, was so negative that in his fury he stood in front of the local government and set himself on fire. Mohammed Bouazizi died on January the 4th. On January the 14th, 10 days later, the country's parliament was dissolved. The president left his, what he said was tainted throne, and fled the country. In Egypt, on January 17th, small restaurant owner, Abdelmanem Hamad, couldn't get ration tickets or coupons that he needed for food for his restaurant. In his fury, he immolated himself. February the 11th, less than a month later, after tens of thousands of people took to the street, Hosni Mubarak resigned. Now, the easy explanation is that people fed up with poverty and corruption, yearning for democracy, and enabled by new media technology, rose up and overthrew oppressive and corrupt regimes. That one's tough to handle because, in fact, from the point of view of poverty and social deprivation, Egypt and Tunisia are sort of mid-range countries. Tunisia is, in that region, relatively prosperous. It has a relatively decent government. I know that Mohammed Bouazizi had a very bad day. But if you take the period, or Tunisia's history, started out in a world where only 3% of women 25 years or older had attended to school at the time of independence. Now that number's risen to 62%. More importantly, female university or tertiary enrollments, education enrollment rates are higher in Hong Kong, in Tunisia than they are in Hong Kong or Mexico. Tunisia provides basic health care that has caused the standard and life expectancy to rise way ahead of that of other comparable countries at a much lower cost. It administers a huge public works program where 80% of the program's revenues go as direct payments to unskilled workers. That's better than the Indian Employment Guarantee Scheme. In terms of corruption, Tunisia, on a list from 1 to 176, comes out at 59, most corrupt state. The United States, interestingly, is only 22nd. There are 21 less corrupt countries than the United States. But Tunisia at 59 is ahead, pardon this for the audience, of Italy, Brazil, and Greece. Egypt at 98th is ahead of Iran, Libya, and Yemen. They're all tied at 146th. Russia is 154. And largely as a result of our administrations and help, Iraq is 175 and Afghanistan is the bottom at 176. These are not clean governments, but they're not outrageously corrupt, and certainly not more corrupt than others that are surviving well. Egypt has grown more prosperous and has improving social conditions. Economic growth before these events was over 7%. The United Nations has a human development index that takes not just income, but income, education, and health measures, and comes up with a human development index. The 10 most improved countries over the last 40 years include 5 in the Arab world, and Tunisia is number 6. Egypt didn't get to the top 10, but it's number 14. The issue is social media. I'm going to skip over that slide. Oh, I'm going to back up. I've already skipped over that slide. These places have great cell phone penetration and mobile use, but not greatly above the rest of the world. So why is it that these governments fell? I'm going to go back 50 years to my time, a little more than 50 years, when I was an 18-year-old soldier in Korea. The Korean people, in a series of rebellious riots, not unlike those that took place in Egypt and Tunisia, but with lower casualties, overthrew the government of Syngman Rhee. I was in a unit that had more Korean soldiers than it did American soldiers, and some of our soldiers went absent without leave to participate, risking their lives. In July of 1960, the first parliamentary elections were held in Korea, and one of my Korean friends did not go to vote. And now, I'm the 18-year-old American, and I gave him the civics lecture about his responsibilities to vote. And he stopped me and held up his hand, and I won't bother with the broken English that he used, but said, "All politicians are thieves. What does it matter to me who steals from me?" And I interrupted and said, "But Buck, you risked your life to get rid of Syngman Rhee." He held up his hand again in a very Asiatic way and said, "Syngman Rhee stole too much." I will tell you that in Tunisia and in Egypt, the governments were stealing too much. Moreover, what the popular perception of these governments were that their families were deeply engaged. The wives of the presidents had become, in both countries, detested figures, and their sons had become so. People were probably willing to put up with them stealing, but not another generation. Another thing that is common between both Tunisia and Egypt were very professional, or relatively professional, armies that were separate from intensely detested police forces, which enabled the armies to take a position supporting a government change without a risk of total collapse of internal security. Libya was quite different. Libya is a very sad country. they've never had a decent government. The Ottomans were not, they were corrupt and ineffective. Pardon me again with this audience. The Italians were exceptionally brutal as colonists. The Italian conquest of Libya involved the death of 50% of the population. Libya then was the beneficiary, it truly was. The United Nations, the United States, and the United Kingdom worked to put together a government. It descended quickly into dysfunctional corruption. And it was taken over by a bunch of young men, for whom the Libyan people were hopeful in the beginning, 1969. By the mid-1970s or late 1970s, the then King of Saudi Arabia puzzled his diwan, his court, by insisting that he travel to Libya. When he returned, they asked him, "Why did you go?" This was King Khalid, and he said, "Everyone says he's crazy. I had to go to see for myself. He's crazy." The reason for that is historically, Libyans, to use Professor Glendon's term, which is an important one, have no avocation or had no avocation for politics. Parents didn't tell Libyan young men that, you know, if you do everything right, you can be president. They told him to stay out of government. Gaddafi supported that and really worked his regime at preventing the consolidation of civil society organizations that might help democracy, or worse, from his point of view, a seditious civil society from emerging. But a funny thing happened on the way to the riot, I guess. There was a riot that arose from a protest of mothers seeking word about their sons who disappeared in 1996 in a Tripoli prison, or Tripoli suburb called Al Salim. That protest turned into a riot. The riot turned into a rebellion. The rebellion swept across the country with substantial, I would argue significant, but maybe not, in the end, really crucial help from the United States, from NATO. Because as that rebellion swept across the country, the rebellious rioters became more and more organized, like an army. But more importantly, beginning in Benghazi, thousands of mothers gathered together and began cooking rations for what they call a shabab, for our youth who were going, so that they were fed. Dozens and then later hundreds of medical personnel came from abroad, returned. One of the favorite figures in Libya now is a medical doctor who came from Canada with 8 suitcases and joined others as they did. As each of these battles took place, as the rebellion moved westward across the country, field hospitals emerged. This doctor with his 8 suitcases before it was over had performed over 105 operations. And in that process, civil society, which had not existed, non-government organizations which had not existed, now exist. It's still a dangerous situation. The young men who fought across the country and took up arms are not yet willing to give them up. But I would argue that the situation is actually a lot better than one would expect, because in each of these cities, as the government fell, local committees, local neighborhoods armed themselves and provided security. There have been ugly exceptions, but in general, the country is working pretty well. Libya is an Islamic society, and it's going to be tough to see how it works out. I don't know, and we'll go on later about my views, but I shared with Wael earlier the comment made by Zhou Enlai in the 1950s or 60s about the French Revolution. The number 2 person in the Chinese Revolution of the 1940s asked about the French Revolution of the 1790s, thought for a moment and said, "It's too soon to tell." So, my guess, we're in for continuing positive but more gradual change. Positive because, and I think this is extremely important, the narrative has changed. These revolutions are unencumbered by ideology. All the revolutions that went so bad in the past had ideologies that they had to uncover. The 19th and 20th century, Peter Drucker called sadly encumbered by movements that attempted salvation by society. Scientific socialism and national socialism, we know what their failures were and how many hundreds of millions died as a result. Second, I think that the change henceforth is going to be more gradual because the pressure's off. This slide, if you can read it, is, now I guess you will have trouble reading it. Let me go back one. The 21st century's got me. We missed one. But this, the large blue, is how many of you, and it's in Libya, believe the country's on the right direction? It's large blue. How many of you think it's sort of okay? At any rate, it's in the right direction. There's a second one, and you don't have to read this. You can just see that there is a statistically important difference between these measures. The measures on the left side of that chart are concerns for physical and internal security, unemployment, economic welfare. Way down in the end are anti-corruption and revenge against the old government. That last slide was Egypt. This is Tunisia. It's the same issue, except that in this case, the largest of those lines are the total mentions of internal security, unemployment as issues, not we want revenge against the other government, we want these evil people thrown out. I'm sorry. So we have governments that are now facing less pressure from their rebellious youth, but under pressure to continue improving. There was an advantage to the rebellions that we experienced. One of my experiences in government was helping Afghans get rid of the Soviets. The Soviets had a terrible time in Afghanistan because there was no head of the Afghan resistance. It was heterogeneous, it was headless, there was no way to decapitate it. One of the reasons that Tahrir Square succeeded, one of the reasons that the rebellions were able to continue in Tunisia is that there was no head. Social media had enabled these people in the thousands, young people in the thousands, to gather together without having a hierarchical structure. That heterogeneity and headliness in rebellion happens to be a weakness when you're trying to administer a government. In terms of the fear about the Islamic winter, it is true that Islamic parties are well organized and they're entrenched. It's also true that the states are well organized and entrenched, and more so. So I frankly expect that we're going to get in continued but more gradual improvement. Tunisia is the least changed because it had the least distance to go. The army's back in the barracks, the police are no longer a problem, the already effective government's back at work. Egypt is still trying to decide the nature of its new government. I would point out that the likelihood that there will be a complete shift away from a security-centric state is remote. 20-some years ago, I was in Egypt talking to a young friend about the lack of revolution in Egypt, despite poverty and some difficulties over time. And he reflected on the following idea, and that was, in fact, the social control mechanisms of this country have only evolved since pharaonic times. They were never uprooted, torn away. As colonials came in, well, starting with Alexander, and foreigners came in, they took over at the top. But the local control mechanisms in the villages and the neighborhoods have really just gone on. I took that as an element of stability, and then we were turning along the Nile, and I could see from one side of it to the other the ruins of the Saqqara pyramids. And he said, now think about this continuity and stability in the following context. When Jesus Christ came here as an infant refugee, those were 2,000-year-old ruins. It's going to be tough to really change that society. On the other hand, and this is an important on the other hand, are we looking at an Islamic winter? Pardon me. Asking people, and this is throughout the Arab world, in 2009 and 2011, what's your most important identity? The bottom of that scale is 2009, the dark, lighter blue. I'm a citizen of my country. The darker blue above it is 2011. One up is I'm a Muslim. Slight increase from 2009 to 2011. The third, I'm an Arab. Decrease from 2009 to 2011. But an interestingly small, but I think significant move, I'm a citizen of the world. Attitudes about persons' identity are changing in the Arab world today. And they are not, despite the fact that those identities are overwhelmingly Muslim. This is Libya as opposed to the whole Arab world. Look, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Libyan, I'm an Arab, I'm an African, or citizen of the world and then African. Libyans definitely see themselves as primarily Muslims. The rest of the Arab world, and this is the whole Arab world, this is really an important difference though. When your government makes decisions, do you think it should base those decisions mostly on what is best for, bottom line, my country? Next one, Muslims. Next, Arabs. Finally, the world. It is a slight but significant difference that the numbers of people who are interested in decisions being made for the good of their country has increased. Those of us in what we fear to be the upcoming Islamic winter have decreased. Similarly, interests in the Arab world, pan-Arab things, have decreased. Another one, which is an indication of how Islamic people's thoughts are, when you really ask them questions where they have to make choices. This is an Egyptian one about if you have to vote, what kind of party you're going to vote for. 32% that light blue, an Islamic party. The darker blue, a liberal, a nationalist party. And then 17, a pan-Arab party, and then a liberal party. It's only at best a plurality of people who intend to vote for Islamist parties. Still at significant plurality in a parliamentary system wins. But I think this is a little more, the next one's a little more important in terms of what people's real attitudes are. And that is, if you're going to go for president, and I know that watching statistical slides is about as exciting as watching paint dry, But I think these are important. Who will you vote for? That top and biggest chunk is Amr Moussa, former president of the Arab League, a secular technocrat. The next largest sign is Mohammed Baradei, who had been the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, a secular technocrat. The next is Ahmed Shafiq, a former general. The next, at I think 6%, is the first Islamist. But this is a son of he is a lawyer who's the son of a lawyer who broke with the Muslim Brotherhood because of in the 60s, what they felt to be were non-democratic approaches by the Muslim Brotherhood. It isn't until you get in these small little slices. The next two are Islamists, but two of the three are quite moderate. And then when you get down into the bottom, you find other former generals. Egypt, when you really ask them, whom do you want to vote for, is a lot less Islamist. Maybe a little more toward their attitudes. Who are the important people? Which two figures, when you give them a pile, in Egyptian history do you most admire? Gamal Abdel Nasser gets the biggest chunk. The next is Anwar Sadat. Two very secular people. The third goes back to the 19th century, Muhammad Ali, an Albanian Mamluk who really started the dynasty that ended before when Abdel Nasser came to power in 1952, almost 100 years. The next large chunk in black is Mohammed Zaghlul, who was an early 20th century leader in the movement for Egyptian independence. These are not attitudes of people who are seeking to turn their country into an Islamic state. My final one isn't there, but I'll tell you about it. The question was, if you had to live in another Arab country, which one would you live in? And this was asked all the way across the world. First place, the United Arab Emirates. Second place was Saudi Arabia, but not for Islamic reasons, I'm confident. United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are two both very wealthy places. It's a good place to work. Third place was Jordan, then Lebanon, and then Kuwait. The interesting thing about this is none of these are said to be democracies. Wael and I had a moment's discussion yesterday, and I pointed out something that was interesting. Up until the Arab Spring, you could say that, with the arguable exception of Algeria, every country in the Arab world was a monarchy. It's just some were honest enough to call themselves kingdoms, emirates, or sultanates. And the others, who called themselves republics, were places where life was less good. Arabs understood that. They'd rather live in a kingdom. They would rather be, and to use old European terms, the subject of a king than the victim of a tyrant. And I think one of the things that we should look for is not the form of government, but its outcome. What does it produce? Does it produce rule of law? Does it produce a reasonable distribution of the resources that it collects from people and then uses back for them? Or does it just rape and steal? I think the Arab world is on the way toward governments that provide better governance, less tyranny, and not governments that are going to be hateful and dangerous to us. Now I'm about to turn it over to Wael, who is going to be introduced, but just a moment, just one last second of maybe humor, because Wael's important in that I'm an observer. He's a participant. He's committed. And as we were coming in, we talked about the difference and what commitment means. And one of the best ways to understand commitment is an American breakfast. And in an American breakfast of bacon and eggs, the chicken is involved. The pig is committed. My friend Wael is definitely not a pig, but he is committed to the revolution that's undergoing and has, I'm sure, a more positive view than I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I like your follow the evidence approach to the Arab Spring. In my business, particularly after Watergate, we say follow the money, but you have just proved that it's the same thing, basically. Let me introduce Professor Wael FAROUQ. Wael FAROUQ was born in Cairo, Egypt. He was assistant professor for Islamic studies at the Copto-Catholic Faculty of Theology in Cairo between 2005 and 2008. He has been a visiting professor at the Faculty of Law in Macerata University in Italy since 2005 and professor at the Arab Language Institute at the American University in Cairo since 2006. He's right now at New York University. He's a columnist in several Arab and Italian newspapers and magazines, and president of the Tawasul Cultural Center for Inter-Civilization Dialogue. The primary area of his research interest is the language of Islamic culture, literature, philosophy, and religion, in which he has published several researches. Now, this is the official bio. Then there are many other things that Professor FAROUQ could say and will tell us, particularly about what he was doing 1 year ago these days. Professor FAROUQ.
Good evening. It's always wonderful to be here, to feel warm between friends. I hope you still have some energy left. Few months before the Egyptian revolution, President Obama was in Cairo to deliver his very famous speech to the Islamic world from the Aula Mani of Cairo University. Before the speech, a conversation between him and President Mubarak, in which President Mubarak asked him, what is the average salary of an American citizen? Obama said around $5,000. Mubarak asked again, and how much the cost of life for an average life? Obama said around $3,000. Mubarak asked again, so what the American citizens are doing with the rest of their income? Obama said, we do not control how our citizens spend their money. Obama then asked Mubarak, how much is the income of the average Egyptian citizen? Mubarak said to him, around 1,000 Egyptian pounds. Obama said to him, and how much does life cost? Mubarak said, around 3,000 Egyptian pounds. Obama asked him, and how do citizens get the difference? Mubarak said to him, well, we are a liberal democratic state. We do not ask people from where they get their money. So this joke is reflecting a fact that nobody could survive living in Egypt before revolution without being corrupted. Everyone was living in Egypt before this revolution had to practice corruption in a way or another. A true story this time happened to me. After buying my first car, I went to get my driving license. And every time I go to the test, I fail in the test. Till a friend said to me, listen, you have to pay a bribe, otherwise you will never get your driving license. It was something heavy for me. It's a crime. So I went to the office I throw on the floor 50 Egyptian pounds, and I said to the employee, "Mister, you dropped 50 Egyptian pounds on the floor." And the employee gave me that look, like, what a naive. And he said to me, "Sir, I do not drop less than 100 Egyptian pounds." Maybe it's funny, but it's painful. It's painful because the heaviest thing a man can experience is to be disrespected by himself. This is exactly what made me say this revolution was not a revolution of anger, was not only due to this economical crisis and the political brutal conditions, poverty in which Egyptians were living. The motives of this revolution, before everything, was in fact moral motives. The thousands of very young Egyptian men, the young Egyptian revolutionaries, who went to streets on 25th of January, they were not poor. They were not hungry. They were not suffering any kind of violence, because if you speak foreign language, if you have a fancy car, a house, police is not going to abuse you. But I believe everyone has lived this pain of living without dignity, because you live without dignity when you do not respect yourself, because you know you are doing wrong things. You know you are not what you want to be. Like myself, a lot of very young Egyptian people who already have nice works were carrying this pain. 6 months before the revolution, one of these young men were killed, were beaten to death by police. Because, and this is the second factor or second motive behind the revolution, these people were very well educated, very well connected to the world, very well familiar with the contemporary technology. So this young blogger used his digital iPhone to film a police officer distributing drugs. And after he put this film on his webpage, what happened after? The policemen, in order to revenge, they killed him, they beat him to death in the street. Of course, a lot of people were extremely angry. One of them, who is very famous now, even here in the United States, his name is Wael FAROUQ, the regional director of Google in Middle East, established a page called "We Are All Khalid Said," and Khalid Said is the name of these young men who were killed. In few months, more than 600,000 of people have joined this webpage. For first time in Egyptian history, this number of people who carry the same pain and the same desire of freedom gathered together in virtual world. For first time, they are vocal, and for first time, they are heard. Long discussion was going on this webpage. How should we react or respond to this brutal behavior of police? Some said, yes, we can burn police station. Some other said we should kill the policeman who killed this man. Very long discussion was going on. But at the end, an opinion have won the discussion, saying we cannot be like them. We cannot face violence by violence. So the decision made, the first call, not for a revolution, but for a protest. A protest against the police behavior on 25th of January, which used to be the police day in Egypt. They have selected this day because of its significance. In the police day, tens of thousands of these young people have marched in the streets, carrying flowers and handling these flowers to policemen who were filling all the streets. This is what we used. I was politically active some time before the revolution, and I used to attend protests in which the number of protesters, maximum 200, and the number of policemen, minimum 3,000. So the streets were filled with policemen, but they couldn't react because they found this young, educated, elegant, and somehow men and women handling them flowers. A lot of people who used to be scared of just walking next to a police station found it extremely interesting, and also there was no violence. So hundreds of thousands of people with time have joined this march of people, and this is how the revolution have started. A meeting, an encounter, even on the virtual world. Of course, on another level, this virtual world represents a new reality. A new reality in which time is not anymore the container of human action. Time and place became a subject of the human action. For this reason, the revolutionaries have represented in a completely different way awareness and understanding of what they are doing. They started to rip time and the place from its generality and give names of each day of the days of the revolution. Because each day has a name, each day has an identity. Also, hundreds of these young men died, were killed defending the Tahrir Square, because it became a symbol of the revolution. It's the space of the revolution. It's their own new utopia. All political, sorry, I don't see, or political or traditional political powers were completely absent at the beginning of the revolution. And they didn't join the revolution till they were completely sure it's going to success. This is including all Islamist parties who were not only absent, but they were also against the revolution. Of course, in this revolution, a lot of things have changed during the revolution because, as I said, it was not anger, it was not poverty, it was morals. For the first time, we see women in the front lines of the revolution, leading men. Peace against the violence, always against a tank, against a gun, they used to have a flower. Of course, Mubarak tried, of course, to kill the revolutionaries, but also tried to destroy the space, the utopia, which was created by them. Tried to destroy what this utopia represent for the rest of the society. And that's the camel battle, when he launched hundreds of horses and the camels and thugs against the revolutionaries in the square. As I said, because it was not anger, it was morals. In Tahrir Square, all beautiful things have existed. Unity between Muslims and the Christians, for example. I have witnessed myself Muslims and the Christians making chains, making walls, using their bodies to build a mosque or a church to celebrate Friday prayer or Sunday Mass. And here in this photo, for example, we see a Christian, an Egyptian Christian, has a cross on his hand, because usually Christians in Egypt put this tattoo on their hands. And here we find a fancy sunglasses belonging to a Muslim who is praying, and on these glasses we find the Islamic moon and the cross. And here also we can find all of these images reflecting that on the basis of morals and the noble human values, this kind of things can take place, not anger. Of course, in Tahrir Square, people somehow were isolated. It was difficult to go out and come back. And when some people used to bring food from outside to inside. And when somebody offered a piece of bread to a protester, he said, "No, I am not hungry." He said, "You will be hungry after 1 or 2 hours." He said, "No, maybe there is somebody who is hungry now." This spirit, this poor woman, and all what she bought for the revolutionaries is few pieces of bread. Young physicians built their own hospital, getting electricity to keep the weapons on, because iPhones, digital cameras used to be the weapons of the revolutionaries. In recent clashes in Egypt, there were shooting from the two sides. From the army side, from the army soldiers and the police forces, and also from the revolutionary side. But the shooting from the revolutionary side was shooting of images. They used to take a photo of the face of the one who kills others, so his crime will not be forgotten, and he has to face his family by what he did. Who have visited Cairo, like Mr. Anderson, knows very well that Cairo streets are the most dirty streets almost in the world. During the revolution, Cairo streets were extremely clean, at least the square. Art and the media, the memorials of the young people who were killed. This image is a very particular one. I don't know how many centuries we have to wait to see in an Islamic prayer, men and women are praying next to each other in the same line. Marriage. Some people, when they got married, take photo in front of pyramids. But during the revolution, they used to take photos next to tanks. Art, cleaning, beauty. All of these things are not a result of anger. They are a result of a true human desire of freedom, because only on the basis of freedom we can live such things. How much time do I have?
5 minutes.
Okay. After revolution, of course, there is a lot of fears. The Mubarak has fallen, but his regime is still there. You can see on the internet, people are publishing this kind of images which express their understanding that Mubarak regime is still there. Clashes came back between Muslims and the Christians again. We see this is also a particular picture because Facebook on the day of election became finger book, because all Egyptians who have voted has taken a photo of their fingers in this phosphoric ink and put it instead of their faces on the Facebook. We see here these kilometers of people waiting to vote. It doesn't represent anything but this desire of freedom. The fear of Islamists, democracy or theocracy. A lot of people now, they have this fear of an Islamist state in Egypt. I am completely against an Islamist state of Egypt, not because I am against Islam, I am a faithful Muslim, but because these people have turned the religion into an ideology. And with an ideology, you can get nothing but evil. But at the same time, we have suffered for 30 years from the dictatorship of Mubarak regime exactly because the fear of Islamists. Mubarak understood he can practice his dictatorship only because the presence of this fear. So he kept this danger of Islamists alive, and this allowed them to build in Egypt a parallel state. This allowed them to be present in each street, allowed them to be the most organized political power post-revolution, and allowed them finally to win the election. So what should we do? Should we reproduce the same story again? Should we, as many people in the Western media, want to give Egyptian army or close their eyes on the Egyptian army or SCAF behavior in order to block the danger of Islamists, and they will know again they can practice this extraordinary status in the constitution and in power because Islamists are there, so they continue to exist and to grow. In my opinion, the fundamentalism's biggest enemy is freedom. Only freedom can defeat extremism. And all brutal things comes from Islamic fundamentalism are not at all a result of the Islamic tradition. They are basically and fundamentally a result of the failure of modernity, a failure of a secular state under dictatorship. This is exactly the problem with the Islamic fundamentalism. Okay, all of you read the news and you understand now a lot of people in Egypt, especially the young revolutionaries, believe that the SCAF or the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces are leading the counter-revolution, their practice, their behavior against revolutionaries, against women, the laws which were issued, all of this against everything these people desired and worked for. But at the same time, and I will come quickly to the end, the people are still very vocal and still very dynamic. And this is what makes me optimistic and give me hope. Only because these people are standing for their rights. For first time in Egyptian history, after the very famous images of the women in blue-brown. For first time, tens of thousands of Egyptian women take the streets and demonstrate for their rights as women for first time in Egyptian history. Here is a video of what these young people are doing. These young people understood the majority of Egyptian people who backed them up during the revolution and who supported them during the revolution. They do not use the social networks. 30 and more than 30% of Egyptian people are basically illiterate. They cannot read and write. So what these young people did, they started to download their web pages on CDs and DVDs, and they started to go to streets in Egypt and show to people in the streets, as you can see, and get them into their virtual world, get them into their experience, make them see what the media and the political parties and the power in Egypt do not want them to see. So if these people cannot use computer, if these people cannot come to us, now we are going to them. So these people are still taking the initiative. I just came back from Cairo around 10 days ago. I was very much down before going back. And when I arrived to Egypt, I went directly to the square. I started to talk to people. And one of them said to me something I will not forget. He said to me, "We are not fighting for freedom. We are free. And this is what free people do. They stand for their rights." This is, for me, very significant because I understood freedom is like love, can't be taken away from you. Freedom and all noble human values are not abstract because they do exist only in our strive and seeking to achieve them. For this reason, the freedom which these people are living now in Egypt is not a stereotype. It is their own unique form of freedom. And this, for me, what represents what we can call the power of God. Because these human values are what God passed to us to keep His presence in our everyday life. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I had several questions for them, but it's too late, so I'm not asking them. So we have 10 minutes more for applause. Thank you very much. Now it's too late for questions, but I think we have many things that we can bring home after this event. there are many other things that we would like to ask about the Arab Spring and what is going on, to two fascinating experts like the one we have tonight. But what can we bring home, at least in my opinion? First of all, that in order to understand reality, you must stay in front of it. You need to be loyal to reality, judging everything and looking for witnesses that can help you in that judgment. And I guess Frank Anderson has been one of those witnesses for us tonight. I'm really glad for the way in which he has helped us to understand that we must look for real information, real data about what's going on. We must look for the real evidence, and we must stay away from the bumper sticker explanation of events like the one I have used at the beginning of the event, that we are going from the Arab Spring to the Islamic winter. So thank you very much, Mr. Anderson, for your help in this. And Professor FAROUQ, I guess, has really helped us to understand that the foundation for a true love of freedom is an authentic religious experience, which is not the experience of an ideological Islam, for example. I was struck when he was telling the story about Muslim and Christians together in the streets of Cairo. An authentic religious experience meaning a religious experience aware of the fact that human fulfillment has to be hoped and expected from the dependence and relationship with God, and not from power of any type, even religious or clerical power. Professor FAROUQ has helped us to understand that only freedom can defeat extremism. And this is what I will bring home with me tonight. One of the things I will bring home. The desire of freedom is really powerful, and we have to take this in account when we are dealing with what is going on in those countries. And I think Professor FAROUQ has helped us even in the end to confirm what Father Giussani has said again and again in the past, that the forces that change history are the same forces that change the heart of man. Thank you very much to Professor FAROUQ, and thank you to everybody for tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Professor FAROUQ, Mr. Anderson, and thank you, Marco Baldazzi. We missed you here, so we're glad to have you here tonight with us. We want to let you know now we're going to have a bit of a break, so you have an opportunity now to go to the restaurant downstairs and cafe, an opportunity to go to the book tables, and also an opportunity to pick up the New York Encounter Daily, which will fill you in on any events that you might have missed. And we will be back here at 8:30 p.m. for a party, for our ending celebration together. Pure American Juice, a free and spectacular journey through American music with Lou Marini, Vanese Thomas, Joey Reynolds, and the Joe Giocardi Band. Entrance is free, and we expect you to be here because it's going to be a great time. So we'll see you later. Thank you, gentlemen, very, very much. We really appreciate it.